You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Southeast Asia is a nuclear-free zone. But how long will that be true? Nuclear seems to be on everyone's minds right now. It's having a moment. Will reactors dot our landscapes and power our homes anytime soon? Today, we're donning our radiation suits and diving into the nuclear world. Hi and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Hello to Li Ling Tan in Singapore. Happy Thursday to you. Best nuclear-themed movie or TV show?
Chernobyl with Jared Harris.
Good one.
Yeah, right? This was a mini-series about the actual real-life nuclear disaster of 1986 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine. I don't know if you saw this. It was gripping. It was heartbreaking.
It was incredible, yeah. I loved it. The visuals were amazing. At first, I watched it on the plane. I'm like, this is not doing it justice. I need to watch it again when I get home. Yeah, it was a really powerful production.
Kind of a slow burn, wasn't it, when it began? And you kind of have to
slow
stick
burn,
with it for
so
a
to
little
speak,
bit.
inside a melting down nuclear
Yeah.
plant. Well, that would have been my choice as well. I think HBO did a great job with that. But since you stole my answer, I'm going to go for something more steeped in Japanese mythology. The original of the nuclear creatures, Godzilla.
I knew you were going to go with that.
Godzilla. This poor lizard trying to just live its life under the ground or in the ocean. And then it's been awakened and empowered by nuclear radiation.
Is Godzilla good or bad?
Well, it varies. Godzilla varies. I think at the start he's kind of a bad guy and he's taking his revenge on humans for using nuclear weapons. But then his character evolves through it. I think there's been something like 40 films, close to 40 films.
Wow, yeah.
So Godzilla has evolved. But I still think a lot of the time there's this subtext of our loss of connection with nature. And he's also a really just cool monster.
It's born from, I think, our fear and fascination over what could happen from nuclear development, right? I mean, we were just talking about Chernobyl, and that disaster resulted in 400 times more radiative particles and substances released into the environment than the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima in World War II. It's also one of only 2 nuclear accidents of the highest magnitude under an international scale of nuclear events. Can you name the other one, Jack?
It's got to be Fukushima, right?
That's right.
Yep. Earthquake, tsunami, power failure, meltdown, radioactivity. Never went to
right.
Fukushima to report, but I've always been fascinated by it.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. I never went there either. But did you also know that Chernobyl was much bigger in terms of radiation released than Fukushima? It was a whopping 10 times more.
All right. We've started out on a doomsday vibes. That's not the
And
point
we
of
will
this
keep
episode.
right going.
We will steer back to the potentially positive aspects of nuclear energy. But first, let's do our quiz. Which country most relies on nuclear energy as a proportion of all of its energy? Answers at the end. Okay, it's news time now. Li Ling, what climate stories have you been dorking out on this week?
Okay, first up, if you're fans of the TV series The Last of Us, which I know you are,
Guilty,
Jack,
yes. Big fan.
about a pandemic caused by a fungal infection that turns people into zombies, this will be right up your alley. Now, research by experts from China, Singapore, and Canada have found that climate change may increase fungal threat to human health. The study found that high temperatures can cause certain fungi to resist common antifungal medication. And what that means is that fungal infections that were previously uncommon in the human population may become, more common. Now, the study is based on data from a China hospital invasive fungal surveillance program. They identified 2 fungal strains that can resist common antifungal treatments with the ability to mutate. Now, the findings support the idea that global warming can promote the evolution of new fungal pathogens and suggested that fungi that traditionally prefer cooler environments are adapting to warmer conditions.
Okay, I'm a fan of The Last of Us, but I'm not a big fan of fungal infections. No, the fungus can stay where it is, thank you, and it certainly cannot becoming alive and mutating as it did in that show. HBO again, shout out.
Yeah.
Have you got any other fun news?
Well, in a variation on the theme, dengue dangers
dengue.
also on the rise. I know, right? So we know it's a mosquito-borne virus, usually prevalent in warmer tropical and subtropical climates. It seems to be surging worldwide, though, as global temperatures go up. And according to the Washington Post, roughly 1 in every 800 people on the planet got it in the past 6 months.
Wow, astounding.
You ever got dengue?
No, but
Yeah, me neither.
that seems like a lot of people.
So global incidence of dengue this year is at a record high, especially in the Americas, with 9.7 million cases, and that's twice the number in all of last year. And in the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, has issued a health alert. Puerto Rico has already declared a public health emergency. So it's the latest in a series of warnings that a warming planet allows disease vectors like mosquitoes to thrive, and warmer temperatures can prolong periods of transmission.
Yeah, we've been hearing this more and more, that these diseases will be spreading into new geographies, into communities that don't have natural resistance to them. As the temperature of the planet gets warmer, as we build up our urban space, we have less access to wind flow, for example, through cities. We have wet spaces that don't see sunlight. All of that is conducive to disease.
Yeah, especially in these urban spaces, I think the threat is a lot higher.
And it's not just mosquitoes coming into these urban spaces. What about that giant monitor lizard? Also kind of speaking of Godzilla vibes, wasn't it? Coming into that flat, 11th floor of the flat.
I know. I mean, how did it get... Okay, so our listeners know, if they don't already, Singaporean man got word that there was this massive monitor lizard trying to enter his flat. The thing is, his flat is on the 11th floor of a building. And this reptile, which apparently measures about 1.5 meters, squeezed its way through the gated front door and lumbered through the apartment, and they chased it and trapped it in the balcony. And it somehow managed to climb up onto the ledge of the balcony and just chillax for a couple of minutes or hours before...
It was Godzilla, wasn't it? This is early...
Godzilla's baby.
Early form of Godzilla. That was quite funny
scary.
footage. We see that in Thailand a bit. We get the monitor lizards climbing up the shelves in 7-Eleven and those types of
Really?
things. But in
Ew.
Singapore...
Have you seen it?
Oh, not in real life, but,
Okay.
everything goes viral these days. Let's go to our main story this week. Nuclear energy holds an interesting place in our psyches, I think. From weapons to meltdowns and monsters, a lot of it is a negative perception or an out-of-this-world idea. But nuclear actually powers a lot of the world already. It accounts for about 10% of electricity generation globally, according to the International Energy Agency. And that number rises to about 20% in advanced economies. But not here, not in Southeast Asia. There are lots of reasons why, and we're going to tackle some of those here. And also reasons to think it may start to emerge more in the years to come. Of course, nuclear energy is clean, it's reliable, it's efficient, and it helps with the transition away from dirty fuels. The world is electrifying, but most of our electricity still, to this day, comes from fossil fuels like coal and gas. And Southeast Asia's demands are growing rapidly. Power needs are expected to almost double by 2050. Nuclear is seen as part of the solution. It is a baseload power source, which means it can operate all around the clock and provides grid stability, unlike solar and wind, for example, which still need to rely on batteries for storage when they can't generate. And that's a technological work in progress. Still, it's complicated. And inevitably, what can go wrong with nuclear power still hangs over us like a dark shadow, as we've spoken about. The meltdown in Fukushima, unforgettable. I remember sitting in the newsroom and watching on a tiny screen this wave just crossing a landscape. And then you realize, oh, those are cars. And it was just unbelievable. Yeah. One of the most vivid memories I have of seeing an event unfold live from the newsroom.
very often when we see these disasters unfold, there's this huge, enormous sense of helplessness. Do you get that? It's like nothing anyone can do in that moment.
And you could see people like on a bicycle and this wave just engulfing everything as it went. And the scars of what happened back in 2011 then still remain. And since then, a nuclear Southeast Asia has been a largely discarded concept. Yet it's actually Japan itself now really pushing assertively towards a future where nuclear energy is viable and necessary again.
Yes, so let's start with Japan, and then we can take a regional tour of sorts and look at what countries here in Southeast Asia are doing. So Japan has plenty of lessons and expertise on this issue. Now, before Fukushima, nearly a third of Japan's energy needs were provided by its nuclear reactors, around 54 nuclear reactors across 16 locations. Today, nearly all of them are offline and inactive. Now, the Fukushima disaster really changed things. It put a pause on Japan's nuclear power development, but in recent times, though, as you said, Jack, the government is trying to reignite the industry, and in part because there just aren't that many viable alternative energy sources, and it's also expensive to keep on importing fuels. Now, Japan's Tokyo Electric Power Company is edging ever closer to resuming output from the world's biggest plant, the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant, and that could possibly restart as soon as October.
Yeah, they're doing the tests, I think, as we speak, and it would be hugely significant, right? This is the same company that operated the Fukushima Daiichi plant, and since then, it hasn't operated any of its facilities since that meltdown.
And overcoming new safety rules and a divided Japanese public are big obstacles that still remain. What about your neck of the woods, Jack?
Yeah, Thailand is an interested player in the nuclear space, and seemingly it has been like that for a long time, but it seems like it's more serious. Nuclear is having a bit of a moment right now. There is some momentum in this space. And actually, Thailand did have a research reactor back in the 1960s, which I only just found out about. Obviously, I wasn't around at that time. But when Fukushima happened, it changed the modern landscape dramatically. And it saw this regional research that Thailand was involved in kind of grind to a halt. In September, the Thai government will be releasing a new national energy plan, which runs through to 2037. We always closely watch these to kind of get an understanding of the energy pipeline in Thailand and in other countries. And it's expected that within that report, in that plan, there will be small nuclear reactors featured. And this current government seems keen on the research front to do more. It is eyeing carbon neutrality goals by mid-century. But you kind of raise this divided public. Of course, it's a divided issue here, and there was an incident last year that you probably remember and the newsroom was covering, Li-Ling, this radioactive cylinder that went missing from a power plant. And everyone in Thailand was like, watch out for the radioactive cylinder. It could be anywhere. It could be literally anywhere. And I think they ended up saying that it had been crushed at a steel mill.
Yeah, how do you lose a radioactive cylinder, though? It's not like misplacing your car keys, right? Or your homework. Did someone just walk out with it, throw it in a recycling bin?
I think it was incorrectly labeled and then transported to be crushed up with a whole other bunch of metal. But regardless, it didn't really instill a lot of public confidence that safety and oversight were up to standard yet. So that's Thailand. And then there's the Philippines, who are probably, you might consider one of the pioneers for nuclear power at a plant scale in the region. They had the Batan nuclear power plant, which was initiated by Ferdinand Marcos, who is the father of the current president. That was back in 1984. It still exists today, the plant. But at the time, it was mired in scandal and controversy. And then just 2 years later, 1986, the same year as the Chernobyl meltdown, and the year that President Marcos was removed from office, Batan was shuttered and it's remained in mothballs ever since. As I said, it's still there. You can still actually visit the plant. I know journalist friends who just went there recently. There are plenty of murmurings that it could be revived. Philippine power bills are staggering. I think there's an estimation that the average Philippine household spends 10% of its income on electricity. So this plant could be useful. And President Marcos seems keen on the idea, but it could take a couple of $1 billion to refurbish. And then, of course, there's that lingering public skepticism about doing that.
Right.
What about Singapore then?
There's been a lot of buzz around it. Right now, though, the country's doing its due diligence. We have the Singapore Nuclear Research and Safety Initiative at the National University of Singapore, and it was set up 10 years ago, if I'm not wrong. It has a pipeline of around 40 researchers specializing in radiobiology, radiochemistry, and nuclear safety. Now, the government has said that it's also building a pool of about 100 nuclear energy experts, but it's also made clear that no decision has been made on the deployment of nuclear energy yet, and Singapore is unable to commit to a timeline on taking a position regarding it. So, very cautious. Interest is there, but so is caution. And Singapore currently imports most of its energy, so nuclear power could theoretically allow a good measure of self-reliance and make the country less dependent on foreign energy supply that's subject to forces beyond its control, right? It's about being practical. And Singapore also doesn't have the resources for other types of renewable energy like wind power. But at this stage, like I said, there's still more questions than answers, including where they would build such a nuclear power plant. Remember, Jack, Singapore, unlike Thailand or Indonesia or the Philippines, is very small and it's also densely populated. So where would the plant go?
Well, that may lead us to discussing about some of the technological changes in the smaller reactors that could end up being good solutions for places like Singapore. But kind of more interested for now in what Indonesia is thinking. They have pretty ambitious decarbonisation targets. And the pure scale of having to transform its energy systems is pretty eye-opening for Jakarta, and they seem to be a little bit more assertive on what they might do with nuclear.
It is overly reliant on coal, Indonesia is, and that's unsurprising given its natural resources. But it also plans to seriously boost renewable infrastructure up to 44% by 2030. So it's only about 13% now.
It's a big jump.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about ambitious goals. So it's eyeing a couple of different sites to develop plants in the future in Kalimantan and in the Bangka Belitung Islands. And to develop these, Indonesia signed an agreement with the US and Japanese companies, and a time frame of 2039 has been set. So things are underway there to have nuclear in Indonesia's energy mix at some point in the future.
15 years, not too far away. Interesting. Now, being the Australian on the podcast, I'd be remiss not to mention what's going on there, because the debate has ignited, not to use that word flippantly again, but in the past few weeks, what we have is the national opposition has pledged to build 7 nuclear reactors as part of what is unquestionably a controversial energy plan for the future. Now, a leading energy group says that plan could cost taxpayers a minimum of $77 billion US. And that's the equivalent of developing a 100% renewables grid by 2050. And the cost could actually go up as high as $400 billion. And these plants would unlikely be online before 2040. They'd only be able to deliver less than 4% of the entire country's power needs. In short, extraordinary cost, long time frames in a country that does have the space and the resources to be a renewables powerhouse. We've seen that shift happening already. But it's become a point of political contention. And the Liberal Party, who is proposing this, says it will be, quote, cheaper, cleaner, and consistent power. Not everyone agrees, obviously. And that brings us really to some of the main obstacles that do exist, though, for nuclear, that the costs and then the public debate. And put simply, the fears that still exist in the community about nuclear energy.
Didn't you guys lose a radioactive capsule last year too, Jack?
I love that it's me. I'm not responsible for this lost. Yeah, it was a lost radioactive capsule. I think it was containing cesium. It was lost on a truck, I think being transported from Perth to an iron ore mine. But yeah, cue the
Just fell off the truck, right?
It just fell off the truck, right? And yeah, that wasn't ideal. And people were pretty scared. I think they ended up finding it after a little while. Yeah, not my fault.
I mean, safety, of course, is a major consideration. And the question is, how much safer is it going to get? The giant reactors that operate in some countries may not be suitable or affordable as part of a modernized green energy system. And that's why the technology is evolving. They're getting smaller, easier to build, able to be transported, quicker to get online, and less risky to finance. Now, these so-called advanced modular reactors, as they're known, are also designed to operate at higher temperatures and at smaller scale. So it makes them more flexible and versatile to use and can operate under lower pressure with passive cooling systems. And what that means is that it can reduce the risks of a meltdown. Now, this technology is still nascent, but on the radar of countries like Singapore and Indonesia, something to keep our eye on in terms of future developments.
I'll just note that Bill Gates, obviously he's a big player in the nuclear space. He's investing a lot in the research and the technological side, and he just dropped $1 billion into a nuclear power plant that broke ground this week in the US, and it's using sodium instead of water to cool the reactor, in theory making it safer. I'm not a nuclear scientist, but that's what they say. And there is new innovation in the nuclear waste space too. That's a big consideration for communities. Even if they're happy to use nuclear energy, maybe they don't want the waste that's left in their community. It makes sense.
No.
And the materials left over from these plants can remain radioactive for thousands of years. It can lead to incidents like Godzilla. And deep...
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And these deep geological disposal facilities are in vogue right now. And that means storing highly hazardous waste behind different kinds of artificial and natural barriers, like glass, cement, or rock, and then you seal it up forever. And that's different to what happens now normally, which is you have storage facilities at ground level. And that is what sparks the public fear and outrage.
I think that also kind of highlights how different countries have different risk appetites, right? Larger nations may have more room to maneuver, literally and figuratively. They can store the nuclear waste. They can build nuclear plants. Smaller countries need to be especially cautious because major contamination or disaster would be colossally difficult to recover from.
Of course, but things are happening, and nuclear energy is a must watch, in my opinion, for us who are covering climate change and the green transition. It's been a sleeping issue for so long in this region, but the climate imperative is really pushing the scales in favor of this technology being rolled out at different scales in different places.
Yeah, I'm not as keen as you are. Nuclear power terrifies me.
Right. And I should note, actually, that there were 22 countries that have pledged at COP28, the global climate talks last year, to triple nuclear power output by 2050. And among those, Japan and South Korea.
Good for them. I'm still not sold on it.
Good. Yeah, this is interesting from you here. It's just killing everything. Okay, I hear you. And obviously investment needs to follow to actually make this happen. You won't be investing, clearly. But a net zero emission scenario requires a tripling of money as well, up to about $125 billion US per year in the late 2020s. So where's all that going to come from? Bill Gates is obviously in on it, but he doesn't have that much money. So I think we'll have to wait and see. Okay, quiz time. Repeating the question, which country most relies on nuclear energy?
I am going to say the land of the free and of the brave, the United States of America.
It's not the US.
It's
not the US. They have... Okay, I'm going to have to do quick fact-checking here, but I'm just going to say it first. They have the most nuclear energy output. But in terms of economies that most rely on nuclear, it's France. So France has about 70% of its energy coming from its nuclear power plants. Now, as part of France's decarbonization goal, it is actually planning to build more reactors, but decrease the dependence that it has on nuclear, if that makes sense. So it wants that number to get down to something like 50% as more renewables come into the system. But it may need to build something like 14 new plants to reach its 2035 energy goals. So basically, this massive output that France has dates back to the 1970s. Big oil crisis led it to try and decrease its dependence on fossil fuel import markets, which were unreliable and expensive. And of course, it does need to import its uranium, but French citizens have largely been in favour of nuclear right throughout the decades since. So there you go.
Good to know. Good to know.
That's it for Climate Conversations. Thank you for joining us. We'd love your ratings and feedback. We'll be back next week.
And don't be shy to like the post or leave comments or ask a question or two. Until next week, I am Li-Ling Tan.
And I'm Jack Board. Thanks as always to the team that put together this podcast: Tiffany Ang, Janaini Johari, Crispina Robert, and Saye Win.